Today, we're going to talk about joint tenants with right of survivorship, tenants in common, and tenants by the entireties. Now, back up because I know it's a lot of lingo. First, I'm going to start off with what the hell are they talking about? We're talking about something called forms of co-ownership. So let's start out in the simple way. If you own a property and you own it all by yourself, you own it in what's called severalty. Now, let's stop and play with this word for a second because this word can be really misleading. Because when you hear severalty, if you're like me, you think several, and then it doesn't seem to register. It doesn't make any sense. But instead of thinking of the word several, I want you to think of the word severed. Severed is the word that's buried inside severalty. So you think severed meaning cut off, as in I had a partner in that property, or like I was married and now I'm divorced, so I own it by my big girl self. I'm severed, I own it in severalty. So if someone owns something in severalty, and it could either be a person, it could be a corporation, it could be an LLC. So the LLC might be made up of a lot of people. The corporation might be made up of a lot of people, but the entity that owns it, the LLC, is severalty. The corporation that owns it is severalty. It's one corporation that owns it. They're not sharing ownership with anyone else. So severalty is common, easy, straightforward, simple, as long as you know that the word severalty means severed and not several. So severalty means by my big girl self. That's how I own the property. Simple, simple, simple. But this whole chapter, this whole lesson is about what happens when I own it with other people or other entities, when I have a co-owner, when I have co-ownership. So we can have co-ownership, and let's say I own the property with my boyfriend. Well, we could own the property together and our names could be on title together, like it's in Joe, but it doesn't say what percentage I own, what percentage he owns, who's allowed to make decisions, what happens when I die, what happens when he dies. We could have an agreement separate outside of the deed, and it says, this is how we own the property, blah, blah, blah. And it could talk about who owns what share. And it could talk about who's allowed to sell it and what happens when we die. But it's not recorded with the deed, which means we could change it later on and there could be a discrepancy, kind of like a will. But when we put forms of co-ownership on the actual deed, which is how we do it, it's recorded. Remember, constructive notice. Remember what that is? Constructive notice is the one where we put something where a reasonable search might uncover it. So when we record the deed, Joe and I buy the property from somebody else. The grantor sells us the property. We're the grantee. We receive title. Our names go on the deed together, Janis and Joe. How it's specified on the deed is going to determine what our form of ownership is. It's really pretty cool. So let's start with the three types of co-ownership. Now that we understand what the hell we're talking about, and we're going to go forward and we're going to define all three of these. So the first form of ownership that we're going to talk about is called tenants by the entirety. Now, tenants by the entirety is a form of ownership that is totally legal in Pennsylvania, but I know it is not legal in some other states. And tenants by the entirety is reserved solely for married couples. Now, married couples used to be man and woman all the time, but as we know, things have changed and same-sex marriage is legal now. So in our legal documents, we're going to see things like husband-wife all the time, but it doesn't have to be husband-wife. It could always be husband-husband, wife-wife. It doesn't matter. It just is married couples. Now, what does tenants by the entirety mean? So tenants by the entirety is what it means is that we're taking these people because, right, they're in love and they get married and now they're treated by the law as one. They're unified, right? They're happily in love and they're mushed together and they're just almost like one person. So when they own this property as tenants by the entireties, it means that even though it's two people, the law is almost treating it as if it's one person while they own it, right? They're saying, you guys own this thing together and you can't split it up. It's like you're unified. It's this indivisible 100% share. And in order for a tenants by the entireties to be dissolved, there has to be like a divorce or a judgment or some kind of splitting up. And when one person dies, the other person gets the property automatically. So in tenants by the entireties, there's really only a few ways that you can terminate this. So we use the acronym J's dad to remember that, and that would be my dad because I'm Jay. That was actually my nickname when I was little. So there are 4 different ways that we can terminate this, and that would be by a judgment sale, death, agreement, or divorce. That makes sense, doesn't it? So you have to remember that during the people's lifetime, one person can't sign off and sell their half of the property. They also can't refinance the property or place any kind of lien on it without the other person's permission. Remember, the people are in love and they're treated like they're one unit because that's the old way that things were done in the law. They took 2 married people and they were like, no, you become one person. And they have this indivisible 100% share their entirety. They're as one person. The entire one person is these 2 people. Reason number 379 why I will never get married again, but that's just me. Okay, moving on. Let's talk about joint tenants with right of survivorship. Now, some people just call it joint tenants or joint tenancy, but I want you to remember always to add the words right of survivorship because that's one of the things that makes joint tenancy so different and so freaking cool compared to tenants in common. So the way I want you to think about it, and this is really super important, is to use a circle. And I want you to use this circle, and some people like to call it a pizza pie, but I don't like to call it a pizza pie because what it really is it's like an island, like it's Survivor Island. So here's the deal with joint tenants with right of survivorship. Joint tenants with right of survivorship can be for multiple owners. It could be 2, it could be 5, it could be 9. I don't think there's a limit, but who knows? I never looked it up. It's one of those things that I should ask ChatGPT, but I haven't asked her yet. In the meantime, let's use 3 because 3 is a nice number to play with. And we're going to imagine that there were 3 owners here, 3 co-owners, owner A, B, and C. Now, I drew these lines kind of freehand and they might not be exactly even, but we're going to imagine that all 3 pieces are the same exact. So we have 3 owners. Now, when we say we have 3 owners, what do we really freaking mean? Okay, so we have 3 people on the title. We have A, B, and C. And when we say they're on the title together, what we mean is they bought this property together. Now, A, B, and C could be friends, they could be cousins, they could be lovers, whatever, but they bought this property together. Now, when they bought this property, they chose, for whatever reason, to become joint tenants with right of survivorship. And what this means is that they all own an equal share. Remember, that's why I said pretend my drawing looks like it's exact thirds. They each own an equal share. It's one of the laws of joint tenants with right of survivorship. But the big reason why most people get joint tenants with right of survivorship is because of, guess what? Drum roll, the right of survivorship. Well, what the heck does that mean? What that means is when A dies, B and C automatically get their shares. It's like A disappears and B and C get their shares. So now they go from owning each a third to A being dead and B and C owning half. And then when B dies, C is the last man standing. So I like to think of it as an island, like Survivor Island. Like we have this island and everybody's on it. And when you get started, you have a third and it's a race to see if you're the last one to survive. So like you invite the people over for dinner, you put a little bit of extra butter, a little drop of rat poison every time they come over every week for Sunday dinner. And then one day, the next thing you know, they're dropping like flies and you're the last man standing and you own the whole damn thing by yourself. Joint tenants with right of survivorship. So we go from 3 people to 1 person. So here's what it looks like. So we have A dies, bye-bye. And now we have all of a sudden B and C own half of it. Time goes on a little while later. And the next thing you know, all of a sudden, B kicks the bucket. The line disappears and C becomes the sole owner or the owner in severalty. So joint tenants with right of survivorship means when one owner dies, their shares automatically distribute to the other owners. Super freaking cool, right? Now, in order to create joint tenants with right of survivorship, we have to have some unities. And here's what the unities are, and then I'll explain what they mean. We have to have unity in time, title, interest, and possession. And unity in means they have to be the same. So when we look at time and we say there has to be unity in time, and we go back to over here with A, B, and C owning the property together, and I'm just going to draw these lines, A, B, and C own the property together, they had to have taken title at the same time. If they didn't take title at the same time, then there cannot be a joint tenant with right of survivorship. So the other thing, time title, they all have to be on title together, and they all have to have the same interest. Now, this is really important because this is the one they like to ask you about on the test. What this means is they have to have equal shares. So when they have to have unity and interest, it means they have equal shares. And it's not any more important than any of the other unities, except for it tends to be the one they like to ask you on the test. So we'll play with that a little bit more. And they have to have unity in possession, meaning they all have the same rights of possession. Now, they can agree amongst themselves that one person's going to live there or run their office and the other ones are going to receive rent. They do whatever they want internally, but their ownership, their deeded ownership says that they all have the same rights of possession. So we have to have these unities in time, title, interest, and possession. Now, one thing I want to remind you of, because you guys, this is Pennsylvania and we have tenants by the entireties, is that tenants by the entireties has the same survivorship kind of thing where one spouse dies and their shares automatically distribute to the other spouse. But they don't have this, the equal shares, because remember, with tenants by the entireties, they don't each own part of it. They own an indivisible 100% share. It's like they're treated as one person and they own the whole thing together. One other thing to remember about tenants by the entireties, because they love to trick you about this on the test, and you know how I feel about the tests, and you know how I feel about them trying to trick you. That's a whole other day. If you've ever seen any one of my videos or sat in my classroom, you know how I feel about that. They will try and trick you. And here's one of the things that they're going to say. They're going to talk to you about an example, and they're going to say a husband and wife owned an apartment building together, and the husband owned a 25% share and the wife owned a 75% share, blah, blah, blah. And then they're going to probably ask you what type of ownership, how they held title together. And those of you who know this stuff inside and out are going to be like, oh, married, oh, tenants by the entireties, bing, and you're going to choose that. And I promise you, the test is probably going to put that choice, tenants by the entireties, closer to the top, like A or B. And then they're going to put tenants in common down at the bottom. And the reason they're going to do that is because they want you to just jump on the answer and click it and say tenants by the entireties, because you see husband and wife or husband, husband, wife, wife, married couple. You see that and you're like, that means tenants by the entireties. But here's what you have to remember. Married people are the only ones who can hold tenants by the entireties because they're the only ones that are treated by law as if they're one happy person, right? One happy, loving person. But married people don't have to hold title as tenants by the entireties. However, when people are married in Pennsylvania and they take title, unless they specify another type of way they want to hold title, joint tenants or tenants in common, it will default to tenants by the entirety. Cool. All right, let's move on and keep playing with joint tenancy for a minute, and then we're going to go right into tenants in common. One really cool thing to remember is that you can break joint tenancy. So for example, we have A, B, and C, and C, I don't know, gets into some financial trouble, let's say a bad habits, and C needs to sell off her shares. She can sell off her shares and get rid of them, and she can sell them to another person, let's say to D. So she sells, and now D is the new owner. But if you notice that when D took title, D broke the unity of time because D did not take title at the same time as A, B, and C. It was at a later date. And simply because of that break in one of the unities, D cannot be joint tenants with A and B. A and B are still joint tenants with right of survivorship. That is still how they hold title because they have all the unities of time, title, interest, and possession. But D does not. So what happens? Well, it's kind of interesting because D becomes a tenant in common, which we're going to talk about in a minute, becomes a tenant in common with A and B, and A and B stay joint tenants with right of survivorship. If that's confusing, put a pin in it, and we'll get back to it in a minute when we come to tenants in common. There are two more things I want to tell you about joint tenants with right of survivorship. First one is this. Since there's a right of survivorship, and we all know when B dies, right? Bye B, B dies, and now A and C are the only owners. Since that happens, and it happens automatically without having to go through probate, no will, no nothing, joint tenants with right of survivorship has a nickname, and the nickname is called the poor man's will. Because just for this asset, this real estate, this parcel of real estate, it is going to disperse to the next co-owner without any kind of will, without any kind of probate. So what happens is, let's say originally A, B, and C were the joint tenants with right of survivorship, and B dies, and now it's A and C. So now it's 10 years later, and A and C own the property, B is gone, B's dead, and now A and C want to go to settlement and sell the property. So they sign an agreement of sale. First, they sign a listing contract, and then they sign an agreement of sale. And now they go to title, and the title company is like, yo, there are 3 people on this title as joint tenants with right of survivorship, A, B, and C. You're A, I looked at your ID. You're C, I looked at your ID. Where the is B? And you're like, B's dead. B had a drinking problem and died young, right? One too many margaritas over the bridge. B is gone. And so what do you need to bring to the table? Well, normally when somebody dies, we have to show their will, and their will has to go through probate, and the courts have to decide who has the right to dispose of their property and blah, blah, blah. And it's a giant pain in the butt, and it's expensive and time consuming and blah, blah, blah. But the cool thing about joint tenants with right of survivorship is that when B dies, the only thing that we need to bring to settlement in order to convey title is B's, guess what? Take a guess. B's death certificate. That's all you need, because on the deed, it says A, B, and C as joint tenants with right of survivorship, which means when A and B show up at the table and there's no B, bringing B's death certificate is simply enough. So joint tenants with right of survivorship is often nicknamed the poor man's will. Now, don't get me started, because you should still have a will, but in this one property that you own as joint tenants, this is going to automatically disperse outside of your will, all by its that. And one last thing I want to explain about joint tenants with right of survivorship is that because a corporation exists until it is formally dissolved, it cannot hold title as joint tenants with right of survivorship. Because think about this here. If you hold title as joint tenants with right of survivorship, A is a person, B is a person, and C is a corporation, what's going to happen is eventually A is going to die, B is going to die, but C could end up staying there forever. So C is always going to be the last man standing, which is kind of an unfair advantage if you think about it. And that's why corporations cannot hold title as joint tenants with right of survivorship. You will see this on the test, almost guaranteed. I don't know why they absolutely love this question, but they do. So remember, because a corporation exists until it is formally dissolved, it cannot hold title as joint tenants with right of survivorship. It can hold title in severalty. A corporation can own property by itself, and it can also be a tenant in common, maybe with another corporation or another person, but it cannot be a joint tenant with right of survivorship. The last form of co-ownership is called tenants in common, or TIC, T-I-C. Now, some textbooks, the one that I teach in actually, also show tenants in common in a circle, but I want you to throw that out the window, and I want you to use a box, a rectangle box, and I am going to show you why. So you can draw a box. So I want you to actually grab a pen and draw along with me. And there's a reason why I want you to draw along with me. There is something about when you take notes by hand that connects better in your brain. It's using your motor memory or kinesthetic memory. And when you do it by hand, you're engaging this motor cortex of your brain, which helps with encoding information more deeply than when you type, or obviously when you don't take notes at all. So grab a pen and write with me. If you have to pause the video, but I promise you that once you do this along with me, it's going to start to register better in your brain, because I don't want you to just memorize stuff. That's not the point. I want you to understand them, because when you have to memorize stuff, your brain runs out of space, and you know what happens is you become stressed out. And when you become stressed out, what happens? Your adrenaline rises and your cortisol rises, and that's going into your reptilian brain. Remember your reptilian brain? You learned about it in school. That's the one that was used millions of years ago. I think it was millions, probably millions, when we were worried about saber-toothed tigers eating us, right? So we have this reptilian brain that when you get feared, your body goes into fight or flight mode, actually fight, flight, or flee. And it goes into like panic mode and you freeze. Well, what happens is if you're taking a test and you don't remember something, or you're stressed out, or you don't understand something, your body is going to go into fight or flight mode. And then what's going to happen is every part of your brain is going to be used to keep you alive. And the part of your brain that's used to think is going to shut down. And that's okay if you're running from a saber-toothed tiger, but it's not okay when you're taking the real estate exam. So every little thing we can do to keep your stress level down during the class, during the exam, during the state test, during everything is one huge step closer in getting you to pass this exam. So grab a pen and write with me. Let's get this into your brain so that you understand it. And then the coolest thing happens. When you start to really understand these topics, not only do you become stress-free, but what happens is when you see these questions come up on the test, and you might not believe me now because this may seem like batshit crazy, but I promise you that when it gets to the point when you really start to understand these things, you're not only going to be unstressed, but when you see it on the test, you're going to get a shot of freaking dopamine. Dopamine is that feel-good chemical, the one when somebody likes our Instagram post, we're like, ding, ding, ding. That feel-good chemical, because you understand something when you see it on the test, is going to propel you forward into success. I promise you. So trust me, grab a pen and draw along with me. All right, now that you have your pen, draw your rectangle, and we're going to talk about tenants in common. So here's what I want you to do. I want you to draw a line. Doesn't have to be exact. Make a little space. We're going to draw 2 lines and then split the next one maybe in big. And here's what I want you to remember as you're looking at these. This, and this are unequal, right? They're unequal. Whereas joint tenants with right of survivorship, which is the one over here, joint tenants with right of survivorship over here is equal shares, right? A third, a third, and a third, which is why we're using a rectangle instead. Because here's what I want you to think about. I want you to think about a Tic Tac box, right? We know Tic Tacs, and Tic Tacs sometimes come in the multi-pack where you can get 3 different flavors. And when they come in the multi-pack, oh, you're not going to see this because it's white on white. You could barely see that, but I'm going to outline it in black so that you can see it, but it's white. See that? So that, there we go. Like that. And then we have, let's say the green ones, that's not the right color green, but whatever, over here. Well, what the heck am I talking about? Here's what I'm talking about. When you buy a Tic Tac box and it comes with the orange ones are nasty. And so you want the fewest amount of orange ones. The white ones and the green ones are good, especially the green ones. The green ones are banging. So you want that section to be bigger. That's why we use a Tic Tac box. That's why we use a rectangle. Because one of the biggest differences, there are really 2 huge differences between tenants in common and joint tenants with right of survivorship. But the biggest 2 things are that joint tenants with right of survivorship must have equal shares. Tenants in common does not have to. Now you can, but you don't have to. And so that is why I want you to remember a Tic Tac box. So first thing that's different is they do not have to have equal shares. It does not have to have equal shares. It does not have to have equal shares. Write this down. Imagine that you're in the classroom with me, because I wish that you were. I like teaching in person so much better. So imagine that you're in the classroom with me and you're writing along with me. Okay. So the first thing is tenants in common does not have to have equal shares. The second big thing that's different is that tenants in common does not have the right of survivorship. Does not have the right of survivorship, which is why it's not in the title. The right of survivorship. Worship. I hope I spelled that right. I'm a horrible speller. No sloppy writer. Does not have the right of survivorship. Okay. See, survivorship. Survivorship. There we go. Maybe I'll edit this out. Who knows? Depends on how lazy I am. All right. So it does not have the right of survivorship. So what happens when a tenant in common dies? Here's what's really interesting. Let's move these out of the way. When a tenant in common dies, imagine that there's a little flap at the top. Remember Tic-Tac boxes? They have a little flap at the top and you can open it. And you just open up the T and you turn it upside down and the orange ones come out. And then you close it and then you open the I and you flip it upside down and the white ones come out, and so on and so forth. They don't mix, right? They don't go through these walls. They don't mix. They go straight out the bottom. And where's the bottom when we're talking about tenants in common? We're talking about your heirs. So T shares go to T's heirs, I's shares go to I's heirs, and C's shares go to C's heirs. So now you have it. You have the difference between tenants in common and joint tenants with right of survivorship. Now, let's talk about why you would choose one versus the other. Before we start talking about why you would choose one form of ownership over the other, I have to remind you of something. You need to know this stuff for the test, but you don't really need to know it for your business. And furthermore, not only do you not need to know it for your business, but you're really not supposed to discuss this with your clients. Why? Because you're not an attorney unless you're an attorney. And you're not a title company. Title companies are backed by attorneys and they're allowed to talk about these things because they're the ones that are giving title insurance and they're the ones that are drawing up the deed. If you're in another state, maybe an attorney does it. In my neck of the woods in Pennsylvania, Philadelphia area, all around here, it's a title company. So we need to know about these things for the test. It's really good to understand them, but we always want to be the source of the source. Remember that? We don't want to be the source. We want to be the source of the source. What does that mean? That means if we come across, let's say, buyers that are a couple. And when we say couple, I don't know if they're together, they're lovers, they're friends, whatever, but they're two people together. Sometimes I find out, sometimes I don't ask. It just depends. So we have these two people together. I don't know what their relationship is. I don't know if they have kids from other marriages. I don't know. I don't know what they want to do. If they want to hold it as joint tenants with right of survivorship, if they want to hold it as tenants in common. So I'm not going to have that conversation with them. But what I am going to say to them is, hey, I know you guys are buying this property together. There are several different ways that you can hold title. So I want to make sure that you talk to the title company about it. I'm going to set up an intro call or an intro email so that they can explain the differences to you. I am not the source. I'm not giving them the information, even though I know this stuff inside out and backwards, but I am the source of the source. I'm giving them the person that they need to talk to who's going to give them this information. And that is one of the best pieces of advice that I can give you across the board in this business to keep you out of trouble and to make sure that your clients get the right information. Grab your popcorn, it's story time. Here's me, here's my boyfriend, and we decide that we're gonna buy a house together. Now we have to decide how we're gonna hold title. Now I love him, he's great and he's wonderful and all that jazz. However, we're not getting married. I will never get married again. So we definitely cannot hold title as tenants by the entireties. So we have two choices left, don't we? We have joint tenants with right of survivorship, or we have tenants in common. So what are we going to choose? Well, here's how we're going to decide. Now, before we get started, you have to remember something. I have two sons And this guy has 4 sons. 1, 2, 3, 4. And they're not my sons. I love them. They're great, but they're not my kids. They're somebody else's kids. So I have 2 sons and he has 2 sons. So if we buy this house together and we buy it as joint tenants with right of survivorship, what's going to happen is when I die, right? If we do me and him, and we each own 50-50, when I die, he's going to get the whole entire thing, which is really nice and great for him. But my kids then are completely left out in the cold. And then what happens when he dies? When he dies, where does the property go? Well, if you're paying attention, you might remember that when he dies, it's going to go to his heirs. And my guess is that his heirs are going to be his 4 sons, which means my 2 kids are left out in the cold. However, if we do tenants in common, then what's going to happen is that when I die, even if we're 50-50, when I die, my kids are going to get mine. And when he dies, his kids are going to get his. So if he dies first, I am going to be tenants in common with his 4 kids, or I'll buy them out, whatever. And that's totally fine. It is what it is. So how would I make this choice? Like, how do you have this conversation? What do you do? Well, here's the way I like to think about it. If this were an investment property, if we were buying a property and we were buying this property in order to make money, it's an investment, right? And I definitely want, it's not sentimental or anything. I want my shares to go to my kids because it's an investment. This is an investment in my future, their future. So the investment property I'm going to hold as tenants in common. But what if we have a house and this house is our love shack? This is where we live together. And we have dinner parties and we watch movies and we snuggle up on the couch and we share a dog and we do all the things that loving couples do. Well, things are a little different because when we have the love shack, this is where we live, and I die, I don't want my kids to get it, right? I'm sentimental. I love this guy. I'm mushy gushy with him. If my kids get it, then what's going to happen? They could lock them out. They could sell it. They could do whatever we want. But I don't want that to happen. I want him to lay in bed, curls up in the fetal position, sucking his thumb, missing me. I want him to walk through the closet and smell my clothes and wish that I was there every day. I want him to think about me every time he sees my glasses on the nightstand, right? So when we own the marital home, we're owning it as joint tenants with right of survivorship. And if I die first, he's going to get it. And then I know that when he dies, it's going to go to his heirs, which is probably going to be his kids. But that's okay. I made that choice ahead of time. My kids have plenty. Make sense? All right. That was a long one. But now that you understand the difference between tenants by the entireties, reserved solely for married people, indivisible 100% share, totally legal in Pennsylvania, but check with your individual state to see if it's a thing. The next one is joint tenants with right of survivorship. This is the one where we have unity in time, title, interest, and possession. This is the one where we use a circle to remember it, to visualize it like it's Survivor Island. This is the one where when one person dies, their shares automatically distribute to the other parties. And then we have tenants in common. Think tic-tac box, tenants in common, because it's possible that we have unequal shares. Remember, we want less orange ones than green ones because green ones are the bomb. And there is no right of survivorship. So instead of the property ownership switching when people die, going in between, it goes down through the spout to the heirs. Those are the 3. Watch this video over and over again if you need to. If you have any questions, just drop them in the comments below and I will be popping in and answering them. And don't forget that I have plenty more help for you. I'm a live instructor in Pennsylvania. I'm live. I do live classes. I also do Zoom classes. And if you're not in Pennsylvania or you're far away or you already took your real estate classes and you just need some help because you're procrastinating and you haven't taken the exam, or you're taking those online classes and it's just not registering, because believe me, I hear that all the time. I have something for you. It is called Mind Your Business. It is a membership that you can join where I come on at least once a month and go over live lessons and Q&A. It's almost like story time, like office hours, like a live class, but on Zoom. It doesn't count towards your hours of education. It's just extra stuff for you if you have questions about lessons that you learned in your online classes or you don't understand something. So I do those at least once a month. And then I also have a once a month business strategy / coaching call that has to do with mindset and how to build your business. So you can get all of that good stuff inside the membership. And I'm going to pop the link below. Make sure that you check out our website, jdrea.net, for all the goodies that you can get, and share this video with your friends. And the number one thing I can tell you is that you can be, do, or have anything you desire. You're here for a reason. You signed up for classes for a reason. And even if it's hard, and even if you think you can't do it, you are here for a reason. Something in the universe brought you to this video, whether it was the algorithm or just pure luck. It doesn't matter. You're here. And I'm telling you, I'm looking you right in the eye and I'm telling you, you can freaking do this. Because if you knew my rags to riches story and so many agents that I've taught and that I've worked with and I've spoken to, this can be life changing. And there is nothing different about me than there is about you, that no magic special sauce that makes me successful that you can't do also. All you have to do is believe in yourself, work on your mindset, know that you are worthy, know that you are able to do any of this. I promise you. Visualize it, believe it, and it will start to happen. And of course, you got to pass the freaking test, but that's what I'm here for. So I hope this helped. You can always subscribe. I'm dropping videos. I have a membership. I have all the things. Reach out to me if you need me. And that's it. Don't give up. Don't give up, because you can do it.